The last question to take us out, and this is kind of going to be a difficult one, but you know the one that was going to be coming. Who is on your Mount Rushmore professional wrestling? Yes.
I've been thinking about this all day.
So let's start with you. It's been on your mind.
Yes, I've been thinking about this all day. So for me, it's guys who probably weren't the greatest wrestlers, but they really moved the needle.
Okay.
They took the business somewhere that it wasn't before them. And so, like Tom said, we have to begrudgingly give props to Hulkamania. Hulkamania was huge. Wrestling now wouldn't be what it is without WrestleMania, without Hulkamania. Just wouldn't happen. First couple WrestleManias, Hulk was in the main event every time. So that just speaks volumes. So he's on there. If you go back to wrestling back in the territory days, I would have to say the king of the territory wrestlers was Ric Flair.
Yes.
He's got a lot to do with the reason why I own this right here. He made this belt so cool along with everything else that he did. And plus, he was a huge draw. Like, Ric Flair could go to Fayetteville, Arkansas on a Wednesday and sell out against some local guy back in the day because he was just that good. My other Mount Rushmore guy would have to I'd have to say John Cena begrudgingly, because John Cena came along during a time where the business was kind of plateauing, maybe even on a downward spiral, but he got himself to the top of the card and stayed there for a really long time, maybe too long. But you got to give him credit. He was able to have a run that most top guys don't get to have. My fourth guy, there's four on Mount Rushmore, right? There's four, right?
Yes, so go for it.
This is going to be weird, but Gorgeous George.
Mm-hmm.
Gorgeous George wrestled in like the 40s and 50s,
Mm-hmm.
making six figures.
Oh, wow.
Gorgeous George dyed his hair bleached blonde. A couple other wrestlers have done that since. Gorgeous George came to the ring in flamboyant robes and music. A couple other wrestlers have done that since. So I'd have to say, in terms of making money, setting the bar as far from an aesthetic standpoint, and I've probably never even seen a match, but just like his lore and the things that he did and what he was able to accomplish in the 30s and 40s. Can you imagine making six figures in like 1940 something? World War II, this man's making people come pay to see him wrestle. That's pretty incredible. So Gorgeous George, Hulk Hogan, Ric Flair, John Cena. That's my Mount Rushmore.
And you know what? We have, just real quick, I want to jump to the comments because we have someone who's chimed in with their Mount Rushmore. Charlie Nichinsky, Ric Flair, Hulk Hogan, Dusty Rhodes, and The Undertaker. Rick Lang, Hulk Hogan, I'm assuming Stone Cold Steve Austin, Ric Flair, and Bruno. Is that Bruno Sammartino?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. All good wrestlers, all I'm familiar with. Tom, how about you? And then Steve, I'll let you close out that question. Tom, how about you? Who's on your Mount Rushmore?
Okay, my Mount Rushmore, because I've put a lot of thought into this over a lot of time, and my Mount Rushmore, I always go by generation, because wrestling is cyclical. It changes with every new generation that comes along, and just kind of by default, then my Mount Rushmore actually has 6.
Okay.
And because I take it way back. So
that has
like,
nothing to do with the new school math. It's just you take it way back. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
I go through 6 very distinct generations of wrestling, and that first generation is what I refer to as the sporting era, the early 20th century, when professional wrestling was actually a sport. It was a competition. There was no kayfabe. There was no scripts. There was no predetermined finishes. It was like Olympic wrestling or something like that. It was one of the only organized professional sports that there were back then. There was no NFL. There was no Major League Baseball. You had golf. Boxing was still illegal in a lot of places. You had horse racing and you had pro wrestling. Okay. And back then, the number one guy in the world was a guy named Frank Gotch. He was the first American to win the undisputed World Heavyweight Wrestling Championship. And in his era, he was the only person you could compare him to was Hulk Hogan, because he was that household name. He was in demand everywhere, retired undefeated as a champion. And so he was it. So he was like the first wrestling star. And then after that, you started getting into that kayfabe era where they were having the predetermined finishes because the promoters wanted to control the championships. And the person that kind of bridged that gap between those two eras was a guy named Lou Thez.
Yes, yes.
And he, I mean, just as a wrestler goes, he is still, in my book, probably the best wrestler. I mean, actual mat wrestler to ever live. He was back then what was known as a hooker, not what we refer to as a hooker today, but a hooker as in,
Crazy.
you know, a hooker as in what a hooker was back then was if somebody tried to pull a fast one on him and not, you know, do what they were supposed to do during a match, he could tie you up and hurt you. So that's my number 2. Number 3 for me would be Bruno Sammartino. I mean, first WWE champion, or not the first WWE champion, I'm sorry, defeated Buddy Rogers to become the second WWE champion, held that title for 8 years, sold out Madison Square Garden thousands of times. And I mean, nobody will ever come close to his title reigns, ever. And he was, you know, that, again, he was that huge household name superstar. And then the next era, moving into the 80s, of course, you got to say Hulk Hogan. You know, love him, hate him, whatever. He took wrestling into that mainstream level where you started seeing celebrities like Mr. T and Cyndi Lauper, and Liberace was at the first WrestleMania. I mean, so he's the one that. Yeah, he's Hulk Hogan's the one that took it to that next level as far as mainstream popularity. And then after that, you start getting into the Attitude Era, and Attitude Era was all about Stone Cold Steve Austin. You know, he to me is the top guy in WWE ever as far as merchandise sales, ticket sales, just, you know, the fans going nuts for him. He was it. He was the man. And then, you know, the next era after that, you know, what's referred to as like the PG era or whatever, would have to be John Cena, you know, because he's actually the last household name, huge, worldwide known superstar that WWE has produced, because they don't have one today. I talked about that earlier. They don't have one of those today. So, yeah, that's mine. Frank Gotch, Lou Thez, Bruno, Hogan, Stone Cold, and John Cena.
That's a great list. Can't argue too tough with any of those names, except maybe putting the Ultimate Warrior in there. I mean, but you know,
oh man, hell
we
no.
need to get past this Ultimate Warrior stuff, Stan. Really and truly.
Yeah, I loved Warrior when I was a kid.
Doing this.
All right.